I didn't know it because I was like sitting on the curb like this, but on the sidewalk behind me, a group of skinheads was coming up, and they're like, that dude with the mohawk, he's the guy, you know? And one of them just runs up to me and just plants his boot in the back of my head, kicks me out into the street. I get up, my back of my head's bleeding, I'm cut up by the glass. The streets were packed. As soon as that happened, somehow like just everyone happened to see it at the same time, and it just got silent, everyone's looking. I got married at 19, was married for 10 years, and then got divorced, and that was devastating to me. Got left for another man type of thing, you know. That was a period in my life when I really wanted to die. I had 2 occasions where I literally like had a plan and went and started rolling through it, and both times God stopped me, He showed up.
Why have you felt so like drawn towards the Lord?
That's a really good question, because like my kids, you know, are in various places in their own spiritual journey, and we talk a lot about like how much of our spirituality just comes from our parents. You know, we were taught Christianity is right. Well, what if I was taught Muslim is right, you know, or atheism, you know, it's like how much of that affects. And when I like really go back to my childhood.
Where are we right now? What is this? What is this project?
We're here in beautiful Sandy Hook, Kentucky. It's a town of, I think the population is like 600 in the town. I'm about a mile outside of town. We're here in Appalachia. I call this the Canyon. This is kind of an extension of a ministry that I planted in Milwaukee in the inner city years ago called the Dullam Outreach. Dullam is named after a cave. I'm a caver, I love caving, and a Dullam is a cave that was in the Bible where David hid from Saul while he was being hunted down, and a lot of the book of Psalms was written while he's there. The desperate Psalms where he's crying out to God like, save me. And so this is Dullam, Kentucky. We're in a canyon. We're planting a place where people connect with God through nature. That's the goal and the desire of this project. And bringing healing to the land and restoration. It's been a really cool and exciting journey. We got a long way to go, but eventually we want to have a functioning homestead here where there'll be a number of people living on site. We want to live off the land, create our own food, all that kind of stuff. And then people will be able to even come just visit, spend time for spiritual retreats, spend time learning about what it looks like to live a much more simple life. Because I think the American dream has been kind of shifted to an American lie, you know, where everyone thinks, oh, I gotta, you know, go to school, get a degree, make a bunch of money, you know, live that traditional life, and that's becoming harder and harder to accomplish. Like when I was born, people could still, you could have a family with one person working to support everything. Now that's a very difficult thing. And we consider our value to be kind of linked to the size of our pocketbook. You know, if you're rich, you're powerful, and you got everything you want. And if you're poor, you aren't. And that's a lie from the pit of hell. You know, it's our value is in Him. You know, and the wealth of what He puts in here and here, more so than money. And showing people a beautiful way to live to accomplish those things. Is, to me, it's something that changed my life as I walked more and more into that, leaving my career and stepping out and living by faith has just been this beautiful adventure. And the level of peace and joy that I walk in is just exponentially exploded. And I want to share that with others. You know, I'm like, everyone should have this. You know? So, for sure. Yeah.
All right. Well, this podcast is like mainly testimony based.
Okay.
So I figured we could just jump into your testimony, and we could just kind of start with like your childhood and upbringing and kind of go from there.
Sure, absolutely. I was born in 1970, so I'm like Gen X all the way.
Nice.
Which you know, is a generation that, you know, many call the forgotten generation, because a lot of us kind of sort of raised ourselves. So it's, you know, my generation is fiercely independent, you know, like to solve our own problems, and we don't mind being forgotten. We're like, hey, we'll figure it out. We're doing life, you know. So I actually appreciate, you know, there was a lot of like hardship involved in growing up in that time. But the hardship is what forges character in us, you know. So I'm grateful for growing up in the, you know, in the 70s. You know, when I was born, no one had a color TV. If you had a TV in the house, it was black and white. There was no microwaves. There was no computers, no cell phones. And it was a simpler time. You know, I loved it. I wish we could go back to that. Technology is great. I love it. It's really cool. But the world's getting smaller and more stressful, and we're impacted by everyone. I grew up in a time where you could still kind of experience your own world without so much influence from, and I think that it helps people get a little more focused, you know. I've gotten off of Facebook. I still have Facebook on a laptop, you know, so I can get on there. Like I say, I'm not against technology, but growing up without it was a much simpler, and it just, to me, more, we connected with nature more. We rode our bikes and we lived outside because there was no games inside or computers or cell phones. It's like if you wanted a friend, you had to go out and find them. You know? So yeah, again, it's just the world changes and it evolves, and you know, I look at how my kids grow up, and now I have my first grandkid, and I think, wow, what is my little grandchild going to have when she gets bigger? It's just going to be a completely different world. Sometimes I feel like I lose touch with it a little bit, and then I just remember God's got it all under control, you know, and He's going to use it. So grew up in a very different time from what the world looks like now. Enjoyed it, loved it. Was kind of a little bit of an odd man out growing up in school. You know, I was kind of shy, introverted. I grew up kind of with a broken spirit, and was always kind of just looking, where's my place in the world? Why am I here? You know, didn't know purpose or direction. Had a hard time making close friends because I went to a private school where, you know, most people had more money than I did and were a little more popular, and I was like always trying to struggle to keep up. Then around in the mid 80s, I got into skateboarding and the whole punk rock scene, which is then like, you know, okay, screw it, we're just going to do our own thing. And so that whole movement kind of formed a lot of my, that independence, that like, hey, maybe I don't need to fit in, you know, to have a good life, which again was a blessing. There's a bunch of junk stuff in that culture too, but there's a few redeeming things I was able to pick up and carry through the rest of my life, so that was kind of fun. When I graduated from high school, I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, well, suburb of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. When I graduated from high school, being in that skateboard punk rock culture, all my friends were kind of into drugs and partying, and I wasn't. I was trying to live for Jesus, even though it was more of a religion than a relationship for me. Like, I knew God was real. I know I was saved, but I grew up in a really strict home where, you know, generally they say your relationship with your earthly father somewhat defines your relationship with your heavenly Father. My dad was a very strict man, so I viewed God as like being the big man upstairs with a stick, just waiting for me to mess up so he could just kind of pound on me, you know? So it was more fear-based, you know, than love-based. You know, I didn't know a lot of the love side. I knew a lot of the do the right thing, you know? and a lot of times I didn't do the right thing, you know, so I lived with shame and guilt. And but I was like, okay, what am I going to do? Am I going to go off? Like, some of my friends in school were getting ready to move to California. We wanted to get into the surf scene and stuff like that. And I was like, well, if I go with them, I'm probably going to wander even further from a real relationship with God. I don't know if that's a healthy choice. So I moved the other side of the country. I went to Dallas, Texas, and went to a Bible college there. Kind of one of the motivations was like, I'm going to try this God thing out at a Bible school, and if it doesn't work, well, I'm at least like in like the skateboard culture that I want to be there, because there's a ramp called the Blue Ramp and some skate parks down there, and I was hoping one day to get sponsored and, you know, maybe make a living doing pro skating. And but I packed up my '76 Ford Granada, you know, old beat up car with all my junk, drove down to Dallas, Texas, and when I stepped out of the car and my foot hit the ground on that campus, and it's like right in a ghetto, bad part of Dallas, I felt God, like, so powerfully. I had felt him a little bit, you know, in youth group here and there and on treats, missions trips and stuff like that. But for the first time, I felt like I'm where I'm supposed to be. Like, God just gave me that feeling in a really, really deep way. And it was impactful. Like I noticed it right away. Like school wasn't starting for another, couple of weeks. I got there early, and I just experienced a sense of peace and joy through my connection with that land. Like there was something special about that campus, and I can't go into the long history of CF&I, but there was a lot of godly men and women that traversed that place and bathed it in prayer and ministry and anointing, and I felt it like through my feet on the ground. And that was, I didn't realize it at the time, but I think that was the beginning part of me starting to experience, even though I didn't know what I was experiencing, this idea of how God uses his creation, specifically the ground, to reveal his glory, his call, his destination, to pass on anointing and gifting, because that place changed my life. I had my first semester a class called Prayer and Intercession, and this lady, like first day was like, okay, your homework is keep a prayer journal and you have to pray for an hour a day. And I was like, an hour a day? Like, I don't think I've ever prayed for an hour straight.
Yeah.
So I got, that afternoon, I'm sitting at home, I'm like, I better do my homework. I don't know how I'm gonna do this. And so I was like, okay, prayer journal. Never done that before, right? So I'm thinking I'm gonna write down prayer requests and things that I can pray for to hopefully take me through an hour, right?
Yeah.
And, I'm praying for my grandma, I'm praying for my mom and dad, I'm praying for me. I'm like, God, heal the world and use me, and God, I'd like a leather jacket, it's just, and my prayer list was like and I'm writing this stuff down, and it's like, it's a grocery list.
Yeah.
And, it wasn't too many days in, and it was like really hard. It was like pulling teeth, I'm like, oh my gosh, I just can't talk this much to God, And I began to realize, like looking over my prayer journal before I'd start to try to get hints for like, okay, I'll pray for that again. That took 2 minutes,
Yeah.
And I began to realize, like, this isn't a prayer list. This is like a spoiled brat kid trying to go to a sugar daddy and ask for stuff. It's just a grocery list.
Yeah.
And I began to be convicted. I'm like, wow, that's what my prayer life is. It's not really a relationship. Like the idea of sitting and listening to God, because the teachers say, like, sit and listen to God during that time. And that was awkward, because as soon as I would shut up, my mind would start ticking on, whatever, skateboarding or the cute girl that was in class or, whatever else. And because I'm totally ADHD. So it's like trying to hone in and connect with God in my mind in silence and meditate on him and hear his voice was just really, really difficult. And it was the hardest thing I ever did in my life. But as time progressed, I began to pray the scriptures, because I had another class where we had an assignment of reading 7 chapters of the Bible every day. So I was like, I'm reading the word. Yeah, I was like, those 2 classes were like so much homework, I was dying,
Right.
But so I was reading the word. We could read wherever we wanted, and so I'm cherry picking stories I like or whatever, and got into Proverbs and Psalms, and I love the book of Genesis, because it, like, to me, that beginning part of the Bible really explains why, who, what, where, why. All the questions are answered there of our purpose, our destiny, and where we came from and where we're going, all that stuff. And so I began to meditate on that, on his scriptures, and pray. And then when I first started feeling impressions from God in my mind, where he spoke to me through my mind, and I was like, oh, now my prayer journal got exciting. It's like, and I wasn't sure. I'm like, is that God or is that me? Well, I'm going to write it down,
Yeah.
And in that prayer journal, and as I was doing that, I began to look back and read it and see, no, that was me. Oh no, that was God, and I began to see even the ridiculous prayers, like, God, give me a leather jacket, they came true. Like, God was answering every prayer. Not always the way I wanted and when I wanted, but he promises, I'll answer your prayers. And it might be yes, it might be no, it might be wait, but it was just cool to see the consistency where it's like, wow, he actually answers every prayer.
Yeah.
You don't have to doubt. He really will, and that was really cool. And then over time, an hour wasn't enough. And I've been an insomniac my whole life, since early childhood. I just lay and stare at the ceiling. And so we had a little prayer room in the guy's dorm, which is an old Sheraton hotel, so I'd take the elevator down at 3 in the morning and just hang out in the prayer room because I couldn't sleep. And God met me there, you know, like those hours spent alone on my knees in that little tiny room, just crying out to God, and sometimes just laying there prostrate, face down in the carpet, just basking in his presence, because he became real.
Yeah.
And it became a relationship, not a religion. I began to learn how to hear his voice through that prayer journal, you know, like through looking back and be like, that was totally him. I felt this impression that I need to be doing this with my life, and I start doing it, and all of a sudden God's blessing it and prospering it, you know, and sort of weeding out some of the junk in my life, and mainly purifying my mind, you know, because my mind was full. It's just so much stuff, questions, ideas, junk, you know, media, you know. I'm a media junkie, so sometimes he needs to purge some stuff, you know, but yeah, so that time when I was in Bible college was it was the beginning of life for me. Like everything up until then was almost like I was in an incubator or like just an infant. Like I didn't get it until I was 18, you know, like, and even then, I mean, I'm 55 almost in July. I'll be 55, and I still am just trying to get it, you know. But there's a few things I'm like, I got that, you know, like, so that's been really, really cool. During that time, I got involved in like a Christian punk rock band, and we started like playing shows at different like dive bars, skinhead clubs, and we had this little place in downtown Dallas called the Prophet Bar, and it was this guy that had started a club, and just people would come and set up art, and it was just like a burnt out, like a bad part of town. And one night a black gospel group showed up there, sang, performed, and this club owner, this dude was there, and he heard it, and he gave his heart to Jesus. And so like, as the sun was rising that morning, they were dumping all the liquor from the bar down the drain, and he's like, well, I still got this place called Theater Gallery at the time, you know, we're not doing alcohol, we're not doing any sinful type of stuff, because people would be, hundreds of people in the middle of the morning would be like just laying there, just dazed on drugs, alcohol, everything. And so he moved across the street to this little 2-story building that he had, you know, it was a bar, but no alcohol, usually not even water or soda, you know, you just go there and hang out, you know. And they had a little upper room, and we would go in there and pray. And like the Spirit, it was like the book of Acts, you know, just random people would be up there. They'd heard about this crazy guy that gave his heart to Jesus, and we would pray, and we'd seek God, and then like the Spirit of God would move, and we'd just like go downstairs, walk out the doors, and just go out, because there's all like biker bars, and you know, it was just a really seedy part of town. And we would just go talk to people about Jesus and pray with people, and you know, sometimes we'd be street preaching or whatever. It was just so cool to live on that cutting edge of what the Christian experience really is, because it became alive. You know, one thing I always like to tell students is like, if your vision for your life is something you can accomplish in your own strength, it's not a God-sized vision, and you probably won't see him a whole lot. He'll let you do it, and you maybe do some great things, you know, but if you want to live an adventure, you know, then you kind of want to have a vision that's beyond your capacity, so God has to show up. And that's what we were doing. And I didn't even have a defined vision. We were just living for Jesus, you know. But we saw people get healed on the streets, and you know, like just crazy, you know, really, really cool stuff.
What's your craziest encounter there?
One night we were doing this thing, and it was about like 1 in, I think, or 1 or 1:30. This is going back a long way. This is in the late 80s, but and I was sitting, it was an old industrial area. So the curbs in Texas and the industrial areas are literally like as high as this bench. So you can like sit on the curb and you feel like you're in a chair. And I was sitting there with this guy just reading him out of my Bible. Like we were going through Romans Road or something like that. I was just sharing the gospel, and we were talking. And our band used to play at this skinhead club called Slip Disked. And, you know, and we would get up there, we'd play some music, and we'd talk against racism. You know? And we weren't very well liked there. You know, they kept inviting us back, but you know, the racists weren't really happy with our message, you know. And I didn't know it because I was like sitting on the curb like this, but on the sidewalk behind me, a group of skinheads was coming up, and they're like, that dude with the mohawk, he's the guy, you know. And one of them just runs up to me and just plants his boot in the back of my head, kicks me out into the street. And I roll out and it's a pile of glass, you know, like I get up, my back of my head's bleeding, I'm cut up by the glass, I'm dazed because I didn't even know it was coming, and the streets were packed, you know, because all these clubs are here. Across the street, a couple cops sitting, and as soon as that happened, somehow like just everyone happened to see it at the same time, and it just got silent, and everyone's looking. No one did a thing. They were all wanting to see this little punk rock Christian kid get beat to a pulp by all these skinheads. They're like, this is gonna be interesting, you know? And I'm getting up, and they just immediately surround me in the road. Cops are just sitting there watching, like approving, like this is gonna be good, you know?
Oh, wow, yeah.
And I'm like, oh God, help me, you know? And I look at them, I'm like, you know, I got no quarrel with you. Like, it's gonna be pretty lopsided if all you guys come. You know, I'm hoping to talk myself into maybe just one comes in at a time, you know, or something. I'm like, that's not gonna happen. And it's just getting really heated. They're cussing at me and they're kind of zooming in. And before the first punch was thrown, I mean, they were ready. And all of a sudden, it just like time stood still. Like it was just as peaceful as it's right here, right now. Like, listen how quiet. That in the middle of an inner city club district, like could probably heard a pin drop. And I was like, whoa, what's going on? And they just stopped, looked at each other, turned around and walked away. I don't know if like God let them see a group of angels around me or what it was.
Yeah.
But you know, because I was kind of bloodied up and already and stuff like that, that night ended, you know, a little after that. Went home, and the next morning, and I had a fractured relationship with my father. He was a Christian, but he and I didn't get along real well. And so I hadn't talked to him in a long time. He didn't call me, I didn't call him. He was up in Wisconsin, I was living in Texas, and that morning I got a call from my dad. Remember, this is pre-cell phones, you know, it's like, you know, the phone with the cord sitting in my dorm room, and like, I didn't even know that he knew my number, and I was hardly ever in my room. So the fact that, yeah, I didn't have an answering machine or nothing, you know, just happened to be there, phone rang, I picked it up, it was my dad. And he's like, are you okay? And I was like, yeah. I was about to tell him what happened, you know, he didn't know what was going on in my life at that time. I was like, yeah, I'm fine. He's like, I woke up last night and like I say, I don't remember at this time exactly what time. Let's say it was 1:53. For some reason, I knew the exact time the whole alteration started that night.
Yeah.
And then this next morning, he's like, God woke me up at 1:53. I know because I woke up and I couldn't go to sleep, and I looked at the clock and said, you got to pray for Steve. He's in trouble. And so it's just like this really cool thing, like, I don't know how much it affected the guy that I was sharing Jesus with, or like what their encounters were. Yeah. I was with a team of people, you know, we were kind of scattered around 3 or 4 blocks. Some of them kind of saw the tail end of it, some of them didn't. But what that did in my heart to show like, wow, God uses his body and we're all interconnected, you know? Like what was happening to me on the streets, like the Spirit of God moved, like someone that I thought was the most unlikely person to pray for me, you know?
Yeah.
And it was an amazing encounter. And these amazing encounters we have in life, they seem to sort of repeat themselves in different ways. Like earlier that night, the guitar player for our band, Juan, had prayed over a lady with a shriveled up hand, and God healed her like that time. And like when I started Adullam in Milwaukee, the first healing miracle I saw was this little old black lady that came up and she had a shriveled up hand that couldn't work, and we prayed and it got healed. And so it's like,
what do you mean by
it brings
healed?
me back. Like it was like it just was unfunctional. She knew what it was called. I didn't. I was like, and it's weird because, you know, I've prayed for 1 million people to get healed, and I don't have the gift of healing, and I don't even have it figured out because, you know, sometimes I feel like I have all the faith to pray for someone, and it seems like they got the faith too, and it seems like nothing happens. And then sometimes I'll pray for people, and I really don't have the faith. I'm just doing it because God says pray for the sick, you know.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem like they do either, and then God will do it, you know. Yeah. I don't understand him. His pay grade's higher than mine. But it's just really cool, like that, you know, these little repeats, like what was the significance? I still don't know, but it's just, maybe there was some transference or something that happened there on the streets that night that God knew, like, there's a seed here that's going to manifest over in another 10 years in Milwaukee, and same thing with like because I've been called to the lost and the broken and the hurting, I've been involved with a lot of addiction and recovery ministries, and also gang stuff. And, violence is kind of part of that. That's part of why I'm so thankful God brought me here. Because truth be told, like, when I left the ministry at Adullam in Milwaukee is going great. I have a great leadership team. I'm still on the board, but they're running it good. I'm more of a pioneer than a settler. Like, I start things, I visioneer. Like, when I got that old warehouse in the middle of the inner city, like, my whole ministry team's like, we're not going there. That's too dangerous. It's too bad, like, no. But I had the vision for it, didn't know how it was gonna happen because I had no resources, and it just unfolded. And then God brought people in, and those people were, I think, more competent than myself to run it and take it to the next place. So then I got to move on to the next adventure. And when I got down here to this peaceful, quiet place and I actually lived in a cabin that I have over by Cave Run Lake in the middle of Daniel Boone National Forest. Like, nobody came there. I was just surrounded by nature. No electricity, I was off grid, and spent a year there and began to realize how PTSDing I was. I was like sort of shell shocked, but you live in it and you don't realize it. If getting knives pulled on you and guns put in your face and stuff like that is a somewhat regular occurrence, I'm not saying like every day, but it's just like you're at the threat of it all the time. And when you're walking in God's will, it's like it's just part of the adventure. Like, at those moments, at those really critical moments where you think you'd be driven, motivated by fear, like, God was always there, so real, because I was in His will. I was where He wanted me to be. There's no fear. The Bible says there's no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear. And when you're walking in love, if you're pouring out love, God's going to keep filling you. And that's what He's doing. But it's still, like, has sort of a spiritual effect on you. So God brought me down here to Appalachia to let me just enjoy the beauty of His creation in the mountains. Sort of developing a theology of rocks and the land, and just seeing how God, His healing virtue through His creation is powerful. So it's been a really, really enjoyable part of the journey.
Yeah, for sure.
It's been awesome. So so when I was doing all that stuff with the band, we started a little home church because we were, our guitar player, his father, he grew up in an alcoholic home. So we'd play in these bars and we'd talk against alcoholism and how horrible it is to be walking in drunkenness and stuff like that. And so we had beer dumped on our heads, and it was just like, it was kind of crazy. We were kind of realizing, preaching in these situations is really almost inciting violence. So we're like, why don't we go, we'll pray up, we'll play music, we'll try to connect with people before and after the set. And we decided to start a Bible study at our bass player and drummer's house. And it almost, we never called it a home church or anything like that, but it became kind of a misfit group of, ex-addicts, gang members, like just miscellaneous outcasts of society would come every week, and it just grew and expanded. And I was like, I love this. This is my calling. I don't ever want to do anything else. Like, I'm going to be here forever. Anytime I've said, this is what I'm supposed to do, it's just a matter of time before God's like, okay, now you got to do this, And I always like miss it, but then I'm like, oh, God had something better in store, which is really, really cool. And so eventually I felt like it was time to move on. I felt called to go up to Milwaukee and basically kind of floundered around. I mean, I was very active in the church, active in my faith, but I felt like what I was doing down in Texas was like really spiritually, like cutting edge, and like I was seeing God move. And then all of a sudden I kind of moved more into this like what felt like a big waiting time, working regular 9-to-5 jobs and just being active in my church. And I was like, God, I miss that, that adventure. What I didn't realize was like the vision He had given me in that prayer closet in Dallas to start this project, Adullam, up in Milwaukee, that there was a lot of, I didn't think I was religious because, like mohawk, combat boot, like living on the edge. But I was very religious. I had a lot of religious ideas. I still, dealt with a lot of shame. Still I was experiencing God's love, but still sort of felt like he's ready to really judge and punish sin. Sin punishes itself. God doesn't have to punish sin.
Yeah.
Like you make a stupid choice, like if I jump off this bridge, gravity's gonna pull me down, I'll probably get hurt, It's not God's fault. You'll be like, I made the bridge and I gave you a brain, sit here on the seat. But I spent like probably 15 years wanting to start this ministry, and there's one door after another was closed. I'm like, why did I ever leave? And I, started having a family. I had 4 kids to support, a wife, a house, all this stuff. And I was like, now I'm bound by this American dream, right? I got to make enough money to buy food and, do all this stuff. And I started some small businesses. I, worked a lot of jobs, had a lot of different careers. And I was like, this just seems pointless and kind of like living dead, like a zombie. Like I'm alive and I know Jesus is here, but this isn't what I was meant for, like square peg, round hole. And then I realized when I first got that building, when, like 15 years later, finally the door of that ministry opened up. Every one of those jobs was an experience that I needed to learn to do this thing, To me, ministry is like, we're just going to be doing the Bible, It's like, didn't realize all the business side of it, the work side of it, the prep, the planning, the organization, the, starting a 501c3, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it was an old derelict building. Like, we called, it was a 3-story building, the stairways, we called it our waterfall because it was just open to the sky because the roof had caved in. So every time it rained, it was like the water would pool and just go all the way down and out the door to the street, right under the door. Yeah, it was rough. We had an old freight elevator. I was an electrician for a number of years. And, I was like, we really need this freight elevator going. Huge elevator, like a forklift can drive in. Spent 6 months trying to figure out how to fix that because I had no money to, And it was like every one of these experiences was either giving me the skill set to know how to do it, or to, when I was in Bible school, one of my teachers said something that really changed my life. He was like, until God opens the door for your ministry and your calling, when you're exploring it, whether you know what that is or not, it's all a journey, right? Like your job until he opens up the door for you is to help others to fulfill their calling and their ministry, whatever that looks like. And I did that. I served at all sorts of churches and Bible studies, rehab centers, meal programs, stuff, a lot of it that I wasn't really interested in, but I was like, oh, this guy really needs some help. They've asked me, I don't got my thing yet, might as well go on Tuesday nights and cook spaghetti, even though I hate food cooking. But the relationships you build and the spiritual authority that you gain serving underneath, the least becomes the great, it's like when you learn to humble yourself and serve, like God wants to pour out his anointing and authority over us, because we're all created to be world changers, but only a few of us ever are, And, the Bible talks about how, well, not the Bible, there's a book I read that says the world has yet to see what one man or one woman totally devoted to God could accomplish. I'm like, wow, that's profound,
That's really powerful.
So all these relationships that I built with, these other, business owners and people that I worked for, some really crappy bosses, were favorably disposed. I tried never to burn any bridges. And those were the resources that then, it was seed sown that reaped a harvest in what he did want to ultimately do with my life in and through me. It was beautiful, it was really cool. Because then I could see it wasn't me. It was God all along. Like all of my efforts, all the years to get something going were just like, like, but then when God breathes on something, it's just gonna work, like it's really cool. So.
Why have you felt so like drawn towards the Lord? Like even as a kid, like it seems like as you're growing up, you grew up kind of in a Christian household, and like it sounded like you really wanted to put emphasis on like your faith, and like you were gonna go to a Bible school, and like you made that decision over going to California. Why were you so drawn to the Lord in that?
That's a really good question because my kids, are in various places in their own spiritual journey, and we talk a lot about how much of our spirituality just comes from our parents. We were taught Christianity is right. Well, what if I was taught Muslim is right? Or atheism. It's like how much of that affects. And when I really go back to my childhood, I think I just always had, the Bible talks about a childlike faith. I think we overthink things. I always felt there is a creator, there is a God. So whether it's a God of Christianity and Jesus is Lord or what, but there is ultimately, to me, creation says there's a creator. Even like the evolutionary theory, it's like it doesn't ever go back to how does something come out of nothing? And our minds can't conceptualize nothing. How do you wrap your mind around nothing? Because nothing is space, right? But space is something. There's molecules, there's atmosphere, there's time, and to think that at some point there was nothing is just bizarre. So there was always something that had no beginning. Well, whatever that something is God, because it's the Father of everything. And when you look around this world, you see intelligent design everywhere. And to me, that something is very intelligent and very powerful, significant. So if you start with that premise that there is a creator and you start seeking, and the Bible says, you'll see the truth and the truth will set you free. So there's a lot of lies out there, a lot of men's ideas and theories, and you have your truth, I have my truth. No. There's truth, God's truth, and a lie. That's all there is, And if we find God's truth, we'll all be on the same page, And His truth, and His word, God is love. Ultimately, all boils down to love. A loving God carefully, wonderfully, beautifully created this environment for us to live in, then placed us here. Adam and Eve placed them in the garden, and then kind of gave them instruction. Bring the garden to the non-garden parts of the world. We all kind of have the same calling, but it looks as many people as there are in the world. That's how many different ways it can manifest this beautiful commission that God gives us and creates us into, and it's all about connecting with Him. He created us with a free will to choose, because that's the only way you can have a relationship. He could have made us robots that we live perfect, but He was like, no, I want a relationship. And so we have that free will, and unfortunately free will makes us make a lot of bad choices, and we want to do our own thing and make our own selves happy, and the freedom that we enjoy, because God created us to be free. I mean, my spirit's cry is freedom. Like Braveheart, Mel Gibson. I'm I resonate with that. Freedom, that's my cry. But what is freedom? We think freedom is being able to do whatever you want, but when we exercise that freedom, working with people in addiction, you realize freedom unrestrained and controlled and not properly understood immediately brings us to bondage. That's why we're all kind of trapped in a life that now I was this isn't really what I wanted it to look like, right? Well, it's because we're not free. We're bound by something. We're bound by having to go to a job 9 to 5, or we're bound by what's going on in our brain, or relationships we're in, or people incarcerated, or whatever. And we exercise our freedom. I remember, my first car. I was like, this is freedom. A car. Well, the freedom of that car sentenced me to have a job, to pay for insurance, to pay for gas, and it was an old beater car, to pay for repairs. It's was I more free with that car? In some ways, yes. I could come and go and do things and go skate with my buddies down at the drainage ditch or the empty swimming pool. But with it came, so freedom without responsibility is kind of a farce, So the more we can discover, Jesus said He came to set us free. And in fact, in the Bible says, for freedom's sake, He set us free. God's cry for us is that we live free. What does that look like? What does that mean? Because what we superficially say freedom is not freedom. It's a lie. And that's why Jesus says, you'll see the truth, and the truth will set you free. So my whole life has been this pursuit of, God, I want to know your truth. about everything, you know? And I know a little bit, but I know there's still a lot of lies in there because my life still has some issues, you know? But discovering it for myself, and then the little bits of truth that I do have and possess, not just head knowledge, but experientially, where I'm walking in this freedom because of this truth that's revealed. I want to share that with people, you know, and if we all could do that, if, you know, let's say someone has freedom in finance, someone has freedom in, you know, in all these various areas, and if we could collaborate and expose that and bring that to the front, and we could all own a little bit and then share it with others, like, that's that spiritual community that I long for. You know?
You've said a couple times in your testimony that you've fallen into like giving and like kind of like letting shame kind of come over you and dealing with that. And I was curious if there's like specific struggles that you've really like hit a roadblock in your life a couple times, and if that kind of is like correlated, because you said you're really connected to like reaching out to the brokenhearted and those kind of people.
Because of the nature of like growing up in a really critical environment, you know, I was told you're never going to amount to anything, you're no good. Self-loathing has been a struggle on and off my entire life, you know, where I'm just like, I'm not good enough. I'm not, you know, I will never measure up. I never get it right, you know, all this kind of stuff. I've struggled with depression on and off. I've gone through a couple really hard times in life where I was even struggling with suicidal tendencies and things like that. So yeah, no, life has not been easy at all. But when you get through the other side, you realize the joy that comes from the healing of those things. And like I say, it's victory to victory. There's things I'm still praying for and looking for, you know, in my journey. But yeah, it's always been usually sin, you know, like, you know, you get in a lifestyle that's not honoring, glorifying to God, and Satan loves to, you know, another thing my pastor used to say is like, sin will take you farther than you want to go, it'll hold you longer than you want to stay, and it'll cost you more than you want to pay. And I found that true in my life a lot, you know, like, dang, I thought I was just like, oh, it won't be so bad to do that one thing, you know, I just want to be happy for a few hours, you know. I mean, like, you know, who does drugs the first time and then, you know, and says, yeah, I just want to go off and be a meth addict, you know, I want to just, you know, like shoot up until I die, you know, like nobody does that. Or just like, you know, a lot of these, I call them fruit sins. They're not the root sins. It's brokenness that leads us to want to self-medicate, whether that's a drug, sex, money, you know, the things that we pursue to make us feel better about our lives. If it's not God, ultimately it's a chain. It's going to be bondage, you know. And some of them might not on the surface even be bad things. Money is not a bad thing, you know, like it's a tool. It can be used. You know, the love of money is the root of all evil. Yeah, we know that. But you know, where do you draw the line of, I'm just trying to get this tool so I can, you know, some people God creates to create lots of wealth to bless others and to give, you know, and so it's a relationship is a beautiful thing. But if that relationship, if you're relying on that person that you love, you know, a romantic relationship, if you're looking to them for your peace, for your joy, well then you're looking here, not there, and ultimately that creates a mess, you know, so.
Well, suicidal thoughts and like depression is no joke.
Right.
And like, how did you get to the other side of those things?
Okay, there was a point in my life when I got married at 19, was married for 10 years, and then got divorced, and that was devastating to me. I never wanted to go through a divorce, you know, got left for another man type of thing, you know. And that was a period in my life when I really wanted to die, and was even thinking about it, right? And began to walk in just compromise. I didn't turn my back on God. I wasn't like, God, you're not real, or, you know, I was angry at God, but I was too scared to admit that I was angry at God. You know, like, well, I can't be angry at God. I know he's there, but this sucks, you know, like, I just want to die, you know. I had 2 occasions where I literally like had a plan and went and started rolling through it, and both times God stopped me. He showed up. But it didn't, it was like an encounter to save me from the moment, but it didn't fix the problem. Like I was still super depressed and still, thinking about it, even though I was like, oh, God showed up, one time he gave me a vision of my kids and like what it would look like if they didn't have their dad, and I was like, okay, I guess I got to be here for them. I sure don't want to be here in this world, but I love my kids and I want to be there for them, so I'm going to do this, so that was what, and I started engaging in, for me, my vice was sex, like I wanted that intimacy. I wanted to feel worthy of someone's love and affection, and so I went through a stream of wasn't just randomly hooking up, but it was like I was dating people I knew I shouldn't. They weren't living for Jesus at all, and we were just, like immediately started sleeping together, and kind of a cycle of that, which I knew was sin. I knew it was wrong. I knew God didn't want me to do it, but it felt good, and I was like, okay, well, now I can't be involved in any kind of ministry because I'm walking in sin, it's like, and so so then that creates more shame. It's like, okay, now I got to isolate myself from Christians, I think, because I don't want to be rebuked, So in some ways I was running for God, even though I was still praying at night, and I still knew he was my everything, but I knew that I wasn't living it. And I didn't know how to pull myself out of that hole. And I felt like I'm unworthy to be in his presence because I'm walking in sin, and I certainly can't be involved in ministry. And then I started volunteering at a rehab center. I was like, let me get back with the broken. And because I was broken. It's like, I got nothing to give, but I want to do something, And I got in there, and it was like a little Bible study scene. I was just kind of like, I wasn't the leader or anything like that. And then because I know the Bible, because I've been reading it forever, like I would have things to say, And so the next thing you know, they're asking me, would you lead next week, And I was like, I want to lead. I feel like I'm called to it, but I'm living in sin. Like I shouldn't, I'm the biggest hypocrite that walked the earth, But it was that scenario, like, I know I'm supposed to do that. And I didn't like cold turkey all of a sudden become this righteous man. I was still like, but the conviction started because I'm like, all right, I will lead the Bible study next week, for this room full of addicts, and my heart's, because now I'm praying. I'm like, God, give me a word, give me something to share with these people that's relevant. Help me not to lie and hide my crap, and to be the strength to be bold, but also like, lead it and everything. And then so my heart started like reaching out to this room full of broken people. And then I wanted to be a better man, not for me, not because I wanted to be better, but for them. I didn't want to be, I hate hypocrisy, and I don't want to be a hypocrite. And I'm like, if I come here and pretend to be one thing and I'm leaving and doing another thing, that's a lie. And so that began the process of walking away from the patterns of sin and walking back into obedience, and experiencing then again the joy and the blessing and the peace of, I'm back on track, and that's, I've had that cycle happen a few times in life, but it's always not sitting in your filth, whether it's sin or whether it's just depression or loneliness or brokenness or greed or whatever it is that we struggle with, in our mind, in our body, in our life, but saying, do something. Get up and do something, because God says he will lead you, right? He will. The steps of the righteous are ordered by the Lord. I read this earlier today, that he directs our lives like a water course wherever he pleases. All those scriptures imply movement. If you're sitting in your sin, or maybe not even sin, maybe you're just sitting saying, God, use me. Maybe you're like totally like clean before the Lord and everything's good and you're ready to be used, but you're just sitting saying, God, show me what I'm supposed to do. That paralysis, Satan loves that. He's going to try and confuse you. He's going to make you overthink it. He's going to blind you to opportunities right in front of your face. It's like, get up and do something. Pray the whole time, God, lead me where you want me to go. And trust me, he'll close the doors. If you're walking and seeking him and you're walking in the wrong direction, he doesn't want you wandering off in the wrong direction with your life. He's got a plan that's going to be the best plan for your life. And so that getting up, I wasn't ready. I didn't feel like spiritually where I need to be. I was ashamed, like all this stuff. But I'm like, once a week, I'll go to this little Bible study in the basement of this rehab center, and sit with these guys that are cursing at me, and then, one thing led to another. I'm doing that, and all of a sudden, a lot of these guys come right out of prison, and they're like, you want to come speak at the prison? And then I'm like, starting to see God move again.
Yeah.
And there's nothing better to excite you into good action and forward movement into your ultimate call and destiny than seeing those glimpses, experiencing it, the adventure of, wow, instead of sitting at home watching TV or doing something self-gratifying that is just going to leave me kind of empty a few hours later, like, I made the sacrifice, I got out and I did that thing, and that thing led to that thing, which led to that thing, and now all of a sudden, I'm okay. Like, wow, I haven't thought about, like, man, I really want to go out and get laid. I'm like, no, I'm thinking about Jesus. It's like, he will renew your mind, he says, take all thoughts captive to the obedience of Christ. Well, what does that imply? It means, like, okay, when I'm thinking garbage or when I'm struggling with my own thoughts, because sometimes even good thoughts are a trap, right? Like, what am I going to do with my life? What am I going to do? What's my 5-year plan? Like, those things can be, like, really intense, and they're healthy and good, and we want to do that in our lives.
Yeah.
But taking thoughts captive to the obedience of Christ means I'm going to obey Christ. I don't have to think about where's my relationship with God, and am I doing good, and I'm happy and I'm joyful in that because I'm connecting with my Creator in my purpose, and there's nothing better than that.
Yeah.
Like, everything's okay at those moments,
Yeah.
It's like, so learn to walk in those moments.
Yeah.
Learn to take your thoughts captive to the obedience of Christ. And it says, casting down vain imaginations and any high thing that exalts itself over the knowledge of God. Well, the shallower your knowledge of God is, the easier it is for things to be above that knowledge of God, right?
Yeah.
And the harder it is to get to that place. But the more you learn and grow in God, the easier it becomes to not let things get exalted over the knowledge of God,
Yeah.
So it's like working out. It's like your spirit. It's a muscle. Faith is a muscle. It's either growing or it's atrophying. And so the more we grow it, like, I remember when in my career I used to be a database engineer in the financial sector, and I had a good income and everything, and I felt called to do this Adullam project, and I was like, I can't work this full-time job that's like crazy hours and this. And it took years to eventually step out in faith and say, God, I feel so compelled to do this, that sink or swim, if I don't do it, I will feel like I failed. I would rather do it and fail and know that, God, I did this for you. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I was wrong. I thought you were saying this, I would rather think I hear his voice, obey, and realize I was wrong and then suffer the consequences than think I hear his voice and do nothing. That's the mark of spiritual maturity, is how long is the distance of time between God speaking to you and you responding. That one took years, because that's, to me, a huge step of faith. Like, I won't have any income. At the time, I was like, I had my second wife, 8 kids I'm raising, mortgage payment, car payment, all these kids. I'm like, I can't leave my job. Seemed like the most crazy, ridiculous, like almost selfish and sinful thing in the world to do. I wrestled, and then took that step of faith, and it changed everything for me, because I realized this thing that I thought was so scary and so like, oh my gosh, in a few months we could all be on the streets. And he just miraculously provided. Again, it was a vision bigger than what I could accomplish, and God just took care of it. Like just the miracles I saw, starting that day of provision, of just like, there's no way I could write out a budget for this ministry plan or even for taking care of my family, but it just, God supernaturally did it.
Yeah.
Just amazing, and I used people and just some out of thin air, sometimes things would happen.
Yeah.
And well, that builds your faith, So now in my life, I have a lot of faith in that area because I stepped out and I used the little bit of faith that I had. I was very weak in faith in that financial provision thing.
Yeah.
Now like I kind of own it. You know, I mean, of course, we're always growing in it, but then there's other areas where I haven't yet stepped out at that level to really see it explode.
Yeah.
But the more we exercise that muscle and the stronger it gets, like, he wants us to be like super people, you know, like he's like, I mean, when I read the book of Acts and all the crazy things that was happening with the early disciples and the New Testament church, I'm like, why aren't we seeing that stuff now? And I believe he totally wants it to happen now. If we would just like get off our butts and stop talking about Jesus and start talking about theology or whatever and actually do something.
Yeah.
Just do something.
Yeah.
Because if it's the wrong thing, you'll know. You know?
Right. Yeah.
And then at least you'll have learned something. Like, okay, I fell on my face. You know, I tried this thing. You know, it's like most really wealthy, you know, millionaires and billionaires, like they have failed a number of times before getting there. We see the success story. We don't know how hard it was to get there, you know?
Yeah.
It's like you'll reap the harvest if you don't faint, if you like get up and go.
Yeah.
And then it goes strength to strength, you know. It's really cool stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm still learning it too. I'm not, oh, I got it all figured out, you know? Like,
Right.
But it's an exciting journey. It
Yeah.
really is.
So the big question, like the main thing at the end is, what is your purpose?
What is my purpose? Are you talking about me as a human or me specific?
Just use a whole.
Okay. To walk in intimacy with God. That is why he created us, all of us. He created us because he loves us. You know, and I think he knows the numbers of hairs on our head. How insignificant and silly. He loves us that much that he's keeping track of that.
Yeah.
And that is where fulfillment lies. That's where peace and joy lie. That is where success lies. Intimacy with God. Learning truth and applying truth. You know, that's what Carver did. You know, that's what, you know, anyone successful is like they've figured out truth about whatever it is, whatever strategy. They've applied the truth, and Jesus is the truth. He's the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through him. So the whole point of Jesus and his truth is to connect us with the Father. So ultimately, to me, it's about connecting in love, because God is love.
Yeah.
You know, if we're connecting with God, it's going to be love.
Yeah.
It's going to be love. So growing in that love, that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Like, and if we could just get that and just like, that's all that matters. Because in some ways that's simple, right? Because I can sit in my living room all day, read the word and just pray and be in his presence and connect in love, you know? Or I can do some great accomplishment, you know, like whatever. It's all, but yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Connecting with the Father in love. Cool.
Is there anything else that you'd like to say to close out?
I don't know, I feel like I've been rambling a long time.
You've been doing awesome.
Yeah,
You've been amazing.
It's been
Yes.
okay? All
It's
right,
been
good, 'cause,
perfect, yeah.
I tend to be a talker sometimes. I'm actually an introvert. I spend a lot of time really quiet. So yeah, when I get an opportunity to talk, sometimes I just...
It's been awesome, man.
Yeah, it'll roll. So I feel pretty complete in the thoughts that were shared.
That's great.
I don't know if I got anything more in there.
That's perfect. Well, you've literally done like flawlessly, like, because this was super spontaneous.
Yeah.
We literally met like around lunchtime and about this, and you were just like, yeah, let's do it this evening. I was like, perfect, we'll just do it. Normally, I get to sit down and have lunch with the guests a couple times and let them get kind of comfortable with it, and you were just like all in, which is like really beautiful to see. That's like, you're like, yes, like I can talk through the Spirit, and like we can talk about like my testimony, and it's just like your boldness to be able to just be like, yes, let's do it. It was really like encouraging to me and really cool to see. So I thank you for like doing this and like sitting down and being really spontaneous. Like we've gotten to meet one time before back in last year for the mission trip, but really haven't gotten to connect a whole lot. So this was really awesome, and I really appreciate you jumping in.
Well, I enjoyed it too.